guys have jokes so early in the morning. Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Chase Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. While we usually don't do shows this early, but how can we talk about Gen Z and not have one of the younger members of the TIR crew on this episode, Stefan, who technically isn't Gen Z, is on the younger end of millennials. We will be back tomorrow as it's Hallows Eve, and we'll be discussing slashers. And after the main show, we're having a movie night watch party where we'll be viewing the original John Carpenter's Halloween. If you want to join us for movie night tonight, or movie night, or champagne rooms, and you dig the listener-supported programming like this, then there are a couple of ways you can be a part of it. You can become a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can make sure TIR can continue on this breakneck pace of shows. Now, onto the show. We are witnessing what scholars and reporters are calling a new transnational wave of youth uprisings led by Generation Z, from streets in Kathmandu and Nairobi to cities in Madagascar, Morocco, and beyond. These eruptions sit beside and sometimes through the memory of the mass movements of the 2010s, the Arab Spring and Tahrir in Cairo, the mass mobilizations in Brazil, Hong Kong's protests, Korea's candlelight movements, and the Ukraine's Euromaidan. These earlier waves shared a faith in the street, in social media as an amplifier, and in the promise that visible mass rupture could force political realignment. But the new Gen Z uprisings are qualitatively different in ways that matter politically. These young organizers are full digital natives. They coordinate on visual, ephemeral platforms, TikTok, Discord, Instagram, use mimemic, and lifestyle politics to recruit and frame grievances through interlocking crises, precarity, climate collapse, reproductive and bodily autonomy, and visible state corruption. Their politics tend to be more decentralized, less party-based, and more culturally plural, which makes them nimble and viral, and also harder to convert into durable institutions. The networks they build are fast, broad, and often leaderless. This is a strength for surprise and resilience, but is also a structural vulnerability. Those vulnerabilities matter because we aren't operating in a neutral global environment. The last decade has seen a worldwide consolidation of right-leaning and authoritarian forces, from formal authoritarian regimes to illiberal parties that exploit crises and chaos. The historical lesson Vincent Bevins emphasizes is stark. Mass protests can produce openings, but without organization that secures institutions and political power, those openings can be won by counter-mobilized elites or organized reactionary forces. Brazil's dramatic slide from mass anti-corruption mobilizations to Bolsonaro's consolidation is a warning. In short, these uprisings are hopeful in their energy, scale, and transnational awareness, but they are also racing against highly organized, well-resourced, and often violent right-wing actors, and against state capacity for surveillance, repression, co-optation. To have this conversation with me, like I said earlier in the introduction, I have the man that usually hosts the Philosophy for the People Sundays, Stefan Bertram Lee.
Hello there.
What's going on, Stefan?
Yeah, it's good. I didn't notice until you started doing your monologue that you're wearing some big ass glasses.
These are because of Jean Bajlan. There's some company out of China that sells, I can't see. So these were $7. And with the lenses.
Do they help you see?
Yeah, these are for seeing.
Right. They're not like a gag gift.
No, I'm blind as shit.
I guess no, but actually no, that's great, because if you have to wear those big ass glasses, that's the best way to do it. Don't have 6-inch frames. Just make the whole glass big enough to compensate.
Well, the bad part is, I'm not gonna lie. I was talking to Toussaint, and we saw the frames, and she goes, "Oh, Jean bought glasses from that place." I was like, "Oh, well, if Jean bought glasses from here,
They gotta be good.
yeah, they're legit." And they came. I ordered them. They came actually relatively quickly, and I was like, "Man, these are fucking massive."
Yeah.
But
yeah, on the protest, I really think that the fundamental problem with them and the kind of problem that you already at least partially highlighted there, and I'm interested what Cuba has to say about it, is that they're framed as like anti-corruption protests, but without any grander kind of ambitions. And so what they do is they overthrow one set of elites, and then some other set of elites go in. But because corruption is caused, like every country is corrupt in a different way, but obviously third world and second world countries have a different sort of corruption, which is kind of viscerally apparent to ordinary people. But I think when you're replacing one class of elite and then another sneaks in, they're just going to be doing exactly the same stuff. Like every outsider, anti-corruption, anti-blah blah blah guy, if he's not also like has more serious politics than that, I think every figure who's just anti-corruption inevitably falls down the same path as the previous elite. If not them, then like the generation that follows them.
Well, let's bring in someone that I think has some good insight on this, as they were around, maybe pulling the strings of some of these protests back in the day. Please welcome Deep State Cuba. People have been
Hello,
excited.
everyone.
People have been excited.
People who are doing the overthrowing, people who are being overthrown. I don't discriminate. Friends with everyone.
Yeah, we hope Assad is logged in right now watching. He doesn't have anything better to be doing.
I had
exactly. Got to keep him on ice in case you need him for later.
I was reading articles about these protests, and it immediately made me go pick up Bevan's book and start reading that again, When We Burn, or If We Burn, sorry. Cuba, do you see any resemblance from what we're seeing now than what happened in the 2010s?
Not really, no. There are some through lines that just go with the territory of mass mobilization, people power revolutions. And the 2010s, you can look at that period with the Arab Spring. You can also go back to 1998, the Asian financial crisis, the overthrow of Suharto in Indonesia, the Ferdinand Marcos, the elder, because now we have to specify, was also brought down by people power revolution, nonviolent resistance, large-scale mobilization in the streets. And that was generation even before the financial crisis. So I think that conditions in most developing countries have, for the 50 years or more, been likely to trigger these kinds of grievances, whether it was in North Africa or Southeast Asia or the South Asian subcontinent, all over Africa. You had governments, sometimes even entire systems, that were predicated on a promise of national development, of improving standards of living, a promise for the future for young people, that failed to deliver. And instead, as Stefan referenced, you had this viscerally obvious corruption in your face all of the time. You had a class that were supposed to be fostering general welfare, but instead were out for themselves. That was leadership. And that frustrated youth cohort then can be mobilized and channeled towards political change. One reason why the migration to the West is such a problem from many third world countries is precisely because you have young people, large youthful populations, very different demographics than the Western world, that see their opportunities at home frustrated, and you either have to do something drastic here or you can try to go over there. And obviously, for the regimes in question, having a million more of a diaspora in Europe sending back remittances is much more attractive than having mobilized an angry street youth.
Stefan, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, someone just said in chat that about the situation recently in Nepal, where I didn't realize until reading about Nepal after the recent protests, is how completely terrible the Nepalese communists were, and not in the sense of like, you know, the sense that communists were often bad in the 20th century, where they killed like 1 trillion people or whatever, or so they say. But rather in a very new and original sense of just the Nepalese Maoists fought like a brutal civil war to get into power, won that war, and then just became completely normal bourgeois politicians, with the only difference between them and the opposition parties is that the communists were atheists while the opposition were Hindu.
Well, you know, that matters a lot for all the 1,000 different gods that the subcontinent, you know, it's much more inclusive that way than monotheism. But atheism, that's the zero god religion, is the most exclusive of them all.
Very true.
What did the 2010s movements, Tahrir, Brasilia, Euromaidan, Korea, achieve structurally, and where did they fail? And what lessons do you think these Gen Z protesters explicitly appear to have taken from those failures?
I mean, I guess Euromaidan was actually the one which was successful in its aim up until 2022. And I guess in some sense, I don't know, can you say Euromaidan was still a success in 2025 and achieving what it set out to do? Maybe, because at least in rhetoric, Ukraine has never been more integrated in the West than it ever has before. Ukraine is now seen as like the spirit of the West. But then if we're looking towards places like Egypt and Syria, in some very distant and horrible sense, the revolution in Syria succeeded also in December 2024, but it was long after any progressive part of what was happening in the protests against Assad had been completely emaciated and destroyed by 10 years of terror and war and Islamization. I think Islamization is also an interesting one because of all these recent revolutions, the one I can see that clearly has changed things in the country, apart from replacing the elite, is the revolution in Bangladesh, which has overthrown a previously secular government, and now they're pushing towards actual Islamism, which then has just led to like not quite pogroms, but they're like smashing up churches and stuff.
Jesus.
Well, I would say that we could point to Yemen potentially as another success story of the 2010 Arab Spring. Tunisia used to be the one case that liberals were comfortable with because it appeared to produce a stable multi-party democracy, but now that's much more in doubt. However, the Houthi government has been remarkably durable. Indeed, what seems to have taken place is in the 2010 wave of mass mobilization, you either ended up with a government that then got caught up in an awful international military confrontation, or failed. Nothing but failures. The Libya, Tunisia, I'm less familiar with the Brazilian case, but
well, you got Bolsonaro out of that.
Exactly. I wouldn't call it a success. And I think that one of the lessons analytically is when you have this breakdown of state authority, whatever your feelings are about the prior state apparatus, then regardless of who mobilized the protests, regardless of who undermined that authority, the groups that are able to capitalize on it and to build their own political structures are the ones that have previously been institutionalized and mobilized. It's very, very difficult to, build the airplane while taxiing on the runway. It's very, very hard to create the institutionalized movement that can take power and execute power, operate in authority, while challenging the authority of the previous state. So in Egypt, it was the Muslim Brotherhood that had previously been organizing. It had institutionalized its membership, created structures and networks that was able to take over. Similarly, the Houthis and the Ukrainian nationalists had structures of their own before the period of political contestation. So that, I'd say, would be one of the big lessons I'd share with the newest wave of Gen Z revolutionaries, right? Pay attention to who had the membership organizations, who had the institutionalized mobilization beforehand, because that's who you're going to be handing the country over to.
Go ahead, Stefan.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm not sure in lots of these countries if these things exist. Like if we're at a point where there even are, outside of Islamists, any real political membership organizations of mass movements in most of these countries. Like, for instance, in Madagascar, there was a big wave of protests when the government was overthrown. They were like cooed by the special forces, but that seemed to have elicited no real reaction from the populace. In Nepal, it seems that this new government was agreed, and then everything has just become quiet again. It doesn't actually seem that there's even this danger of these embedded, membered movements seizing this the movement that was created by the masses, because there don't seem to even be these mass organizations. I think we're really at we're getting a lower ebb of these features of what we understood to be politics in the 20th century, of how things worked in the 20th century, in terms of, you're going to have a mass movement full of actual members who believe in certain things, and they work constantly to achieve a certain end. Like the only real group, this kind of international groupings you can think of in these terms, again, are like Islamists. Outside of that, there's no global communist movement or anything like this in any real sense. And even the waves of kind of nationalist fervor are dead in most countries.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's in this context that you've had so much effort by the alt-right and the European far right to create an international right-wing nationalist movement, something that would incubate and enable that type of institution building, that type of movement building, because they're actually much more disciplined and prepared in terms of what it takes to seize and exercise authority. Project 2025, say what you will about its content, and many of the cast of characters are on the goofus end of the spectrum, but they had a plan and they've been executing towards it. That's a lot more than I can say for any kind of socialist international or any force on the left. Either you have groups that are tiny and cult-like and therefore marginal, or one of the great dangers of leaderless, decentralized, horizontal movement building, as we saw with Occupy Wall Street and a lot of the leftist mobilization, especially in the United States, is that you end up with an organization that may be large, but it is not effective.
What say you, Stefan and Kuba, when people say, well, these are just color revolutions? This is all the CIA.
At this point, like, who cares? Like, if the CIA wants to overthrow the useless governments in Bangladesh or Nepal or Madagascar,
hilarious, right?
like,
That's
they weren't previously like bastions of anti-imperialism that were progressing towards socialism. You know, like if they want to do it, go ahead. Like, I think they're wasting their time. Like,
all
Bit of a
these countries.
lateral move.
These countries
Yeah.
are so small, and you don't want to say insignificant, but I mean, in the U.S. sphere, you really think that these are the same people that I feel like the government is extremely inept to them, but then it's powerful enough to organize all these young people through social media when you know the people running the CIA are still trying to figure out how to like change the camera to front facing.
like the
Oh,
kind of anti-imperialist bloc in the Middle East run by Iran or whatever has really suffered in the past few years, but it hasn't been because of like gentle protest movements. It's because of ballistic missiles and bombs and jihadists with guns. You know,
and Israel.
that was, you know, they were the
Yeah, that
bombs
was
and
the
missiles.
first part, exactly. Being, and I think that another observation to pick up on that is the people who really knew what they were doing in the CIA and the State Department, right? They've been doged.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how aren't they like? This could be like they're firing their last reserves, but if so, it's again. It seems like they're shooting the
Or
wrong
it,
direction.
or it could very well be that now that you've been fired, it's like, well, I guess I could just overthrow the government of Bangladesh and they could hire me.
Right. Then you get employed by the new people.
That's the plan.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. Get
$3.50
some
an hour.
As they're cleaning out their office, Kuba, as they're cleaning out their office, he's got the big map behind him. He's like,
Plan B, George. Plan B. Yeah.
Does it make you kind of sad that people can only see the world through the lens of American imperialism in that no country can do anything on their own? It has to be US intervention.
That's the sort of thing that
That inverted American imperialism that Jean Bajelon wrote about some time ago.
Yeah, exactly. That's in a lot of ways, if you stop and think about it, from good liberal identitarian grounds, that's pretty offensive, right? Like, what? Only Americans have agency. But this is one challenge of anybody who belongs to a movement that they believe should be popular that isn't, right? It's the working class that should be carrying the socialist revolution. So why aren't they? Well, you either have to come to terms with the fact that, maybe they're just not that into seizing the means of production, or you come up with some villain that is between the people and their rightful political ends. And the CIA plays that wonderful role. You can talk about the color revolutions, organized opposition, dismiss anything that isn't the pure, unlaced revolutionary socialism that you're craving. But the reality is that however persuasive you might find those political arguments, we exist in the reality that we do, right? The left has failed to make a Marxist case. In most countries, the energy belongs to Islamists and nationalists. The most promising of the developments in terms of leftist mobilization that have recently taken place may not be the Gen Z Uprisings, but the solidly millennial campaign of Zoran Mamdani.
Yeah, and in the UK, like, we've had, like, when I say, there's no grand global socialist communist movement, that doesn't mean that people aren't interested in that sort of thing, because we're seeing just now in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn tried to found his Your Party,
Yeah.
and it had like 18 civil wars before it was even founded. It still isn't founded, and it's just having. And I think yesterday Corbyn started suing Driscoll or whatever. Regardless, I've stopped paying attention. I don't give a shit. But while all that's been happening, the Green Party has now got up to second place in the polls. And the
Really?
Green Party is, of course, like a weird party, as most Green parties are, a mix of like rural conservatives who are interested in like preserving the environment in the old-fashioned sense, with kind of urban socialist liberal kind of people. But they've got a new populist leader, and people are very, very interested in it. So yeah, it does seem like the boring stuff is doing well.
Vincent Bevins argues protests must organize for success. What does organizing look like in 2025 for a generation that gravitates towards leaderlessness and decentralized tactics? Can new organizational forms, mutual aid networks, federated digital co-ops, workplace organizing, can that bridge the gap?
No.
Do you want to hear a story about when we did some leaderless blah 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 constitution blah, 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 stuff when I was in university?
Oh, when you were in university. Okay, yep, preach.
University. So this would be like 2013, and we organized a big conference on campus, like an academic but more than academic conference, about kind of, it was based around like Podemos and Syriza and this kind of era of things. And so after the conference, people were interested in founding a group to go along with the after the conference. And so in our first meeting, 150 people came, and the kind of professional leftist people decided to spend those 3-hour meeting like forming a constitution, but only through like consensus and without like a leader and so on. And then because that took like many hours to get nowhere, we had a second meeting to do the same where 50 people attended. And then we had a third meeting to do the same thing when it was back just to the 10 usual ones of us.
We're striking while the iron is hot.
Yeah.
How did you feel when it was over? Did you feel like, oh, maybe this leaderlessness stuff isn't all it's cracked up to be?
Well, no, because this is only in reflection. At the time, I didn't realize what we'd done horribly wrong. I mean, to be clear, I wasn't in charge. I was literally 18 at the time. But yeah, it was, in retrospect, I was like, oh my God, what were we doing? How could we possibly think that that was the right thing to do?
It was the most common tactic. That was one of the bad lessons taught an entire generation of leftist organizers and activists by the bad experiments of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where you have one after another splinter leftist party either turning into a weird cult of personality or trying to third world liberation their way into some kind of direct action. And the solution was supposed to be hyper consensual, universalist, leaderless methods of mobilization. And that got you Zuccotti Plaza. And that is all. Right? It might be the case that you can get, in this sort of leaderless way, people to come out for an event. You can get them into the streets. But just as with Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood, once they're in the streets, there need to be some kind of organized systems of authority, division of responsibilities, networks of secure communication to get people to just pick up their trash. Without that, then you're really at the mercy of whatever moods and impulses can seize the crowd. And
You know where? Sorry, I thought you were done.
no, please.
In Burma, leaderless organization was used very effectively a few years ago to organize pogroms of the Rohingya. They were all organized leaderlessly on WhatsApp, often with most of the kind of pogromists being illiterate. So it was all organized through voice messages on WhatsApp, leaderlessly without any grand central organization, through Facebook Messenger also. And because Facebook had fired all their censors at the time and rehired like AI to do their jobs instead, they were able to like flawlessly, seamlessly flow in all the kind of modern contemporary ways through organizing various genocidal massacres in Burma.
I stand corrected, right? Take that, Zuccotti Plaza.
I don't want to get too incredibly grim, but I did see an incredible photograph today that came out of Sudan, where obviously, as I'm sure you two have heard, very terrible things are happening. Mm-hmm. But an interesting way that social media is being used in the second and third world now is, I guess we also saw this in Gaza, wow, is that second, third, first, fourth world?
May be down to 0 thanks to the Israelis.
Yeah. Where genocidaires love to post themselves doing genocide on WhatsApp and other places. And I basically saw a photograph today from Sudan, which was, the photograph, The Last Jew in Vilnius?
No.
The Last Jew in Vilnius is the very famous photograph from the Holocaust, where there's a pit has been dug and it is now filled with dead bodies. And there's a SS soldier holding a pistol to the back of the head of the last Jew in Vilnius, who is crouched on the edge of the pit looking towards the camera. And I basically saw a modern rendition of that photograph, but from the POV of the guy with the gun. The actual, what you see is the shadow.
Yeah.
The shadow facing towards the person who's about to be massacred. And that's really the fantastically 21st century thing about it, is that, we're not getting it from the outside in any way, but the genocidaire is there holding his rifle, casting his shadow on the person he's going to kill.
Why do you think people aren't really talking about what's going on in Sudan right now, Kuba and Stefan?
I think that there's especially inside the United States, but even this is something that you can observe in every developed country. You can have decent education systems, a relatively high level of literacy and engagement in the public, but there's really only enough bandwidth for 1 or 2 wars at a time. Right now, those are Gaza, and if you have the season pass, Ukraine. After that, especially in a region that is remote and where there's multiple security, long-running security crises, South Sudan has never stabilized. Ethiopia just got out of its own civil war. You continue to have conflict in Somalia. Eritrea is a terrifying and impoverished police state, a little African North Korea. So people just don't have the space for it, man. Right? Like, not everybody's George Clooney with that sweet Nespresso money that lets you just sit back and read the entire newspaper. No, they're
there's a global concern economy, and especially recently, it's constantly running at max. Like, there's a constant, massive, total demand on people's concern as we approach this point where just wars are happening nonstop and events are happening. And it's like, why would anyone care about what's happening in Sudan? It's something which has happened before. It's something which is like on the margins of a marginal country. Like this isn't the center of Sudan. This is in the southwest, and it's a group being slaughtered by another group, which people just can't really grasp because it's like the militias doing it. We would probably understand as Westerners as being black, but in the context of Sudan, they're Arabs. Because they're Arab speaking, while the people being slaughtered are non-Arab, despite looking to us the same as the people who are doing the slaughtering, but are African, or however they say it over there, black, because they are non-Arabs, because they don't speak Arabic. And both to the Sudanese government and the Janjaweed, this group is a marginal group that they aren't concerned with. This isn't the central consistency of either group in the conflict. In fact, the Janjaweed, the RSF militias, they were created in order to do what they were doing. They were created by the Sudanese government to repress and slaughter the people in Darfur and elsewhere on the margins of Sudan. And what happened, the civil war happened when this mercenary group, or however you'd like to call them, entered the center and wanted to say, we're the government now.
I would say that when we're thinking about the dynamics of ethnic conflict in Sudan, it has a much longer time frame than the last mobilization against Darfur, which also George Clooney was the big advocate at that point too. He's somebody who has always been paying attention to Sudan.
Was it like 20 years ago?
Yeah, it was
Red campaign.
It was around the same time. I remember even then we had dueling genocides because
Darfur.
It was Darfur and Coney 2012.
Yes.
Oof.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that just bury their heads very deep in sand when you say Coney 2012.
Because the whole thing was embarrassing. You had the profound seriousness of these life and death atrocities, these fundamental security crises that were violently reshaping an entire region at the heart of Africa. And then you have Westerners that saw a YouTube documentary that decided that, this is going to be my project.
Was Coney Was Coney a Congolese warlord, or was he one from around the Chad Basin?
I believe that he was from Uganda originally. And
right, so that would be the Congo thing, right?
Well, I don't think that he is Congolese. He belongs to a weird Christian millenarian offshoot, a bizarre cult, the Lord's Resistance Army, and their whole thing was governance through the 12 commandments.
He's from Uganda.
Yeah, and Uganda has this very persistent tendency towards Christian theocracy, right? It's one of the most homophobic, in terms of its legal code, one of the most homophobic states in Africa, which is saying something. And the constituency for religious secularism is basically non-existent. You don't even have the type of situation you do in some multi-faith countries in Africa, where it's like, okay, we're about 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. We got to find a way to get God out of the constitution. No, Uganda is like, what abominable rite of Jehovah worship are we going to go all in on with the human sacrifice and everything? That's the locus of contestation. And Joseph Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army, they had a response to that, which was, we're not going to be outflanked by anybody. We'll take the most extreme position. Thank you very much. Yeah, and so I think that it's very difficult for people to get to be able to parse what's happening in Sudan, even without all of the demands on their attention coming from Gaza as the most urgent example, right? The pressure that's placed on the humanitarian motivated mobilization in Western countries is can't be overstated, right? When you go to a peace protest now, they're talking about Gaza.
Stefan, is it the same for you in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, overwhelmingly, the focus is on Gaza and Palestine. Like the situation in Syria was not particularly much of a thing. Like, as in, sorry, the massacres that happened to the Alawites and the Druze. So that did become an issue, kind of not quite in the UK, but more. But that was because again, it was pushed by Israel, which it's fine when Israel pushes things which are bad. But yeah, it's just this global concern economy and to do with politics, and yeah, I mean, there's just not enough to go around. Like as I clearly showed there, I'd forgotten about Joseph Kony and where the situation was in there, or was it in Chad, or was it in Uganda? And as me getting confused and forgetting about Joseph Kony, I think it's very hard to tell a clear story about Sudan and what's happening there and why you should care, apart from the classic thing that people are dying and being slaughtered. But I think these days, telling people that people are being died or being killed and being slaughtered somewhere doesn't mean much. Like people are hearing that constantly non-stop. I think you need a story which is clearer. I mean, the fundamental problem with what's happening in Sudan is there's no ability really to frame it within these stories about the West, because I think the reason that stories about Gaza, and as previously as we mentioned, we were making fun of the idea that all these protests are run by the West. This is part of a story making by Westerners, where if you want them to care about the situation, you want to relate it back to the West, and that can come through ethnic and religious ties, or which often is the case in Gaza and in Palestine, but it can also be the basic framing of you should care about what's happening in Gaza because we're involved in Gaza. But in a genuine sense, the West and Israel are very only indirectly involved in Sudan. The UAE is seriously involved in Sudan, but that's like a series of jumps for people to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to go first to the plane that Trump received from Qatar, and then be like, Qatar is kind of like the UAE, which also signed the Abraham Accords with Israel. Bada boom, bada bing. Netanyahu and Trump did Sudan.
The funny thing is, I feel like Dubai is a very, very famous name in the UK. I think more than the United States, but it's very, very famous. But then I think the amount of people that would be able to connect Dubai to the country of UAE is probably like 20-30%.
Yeah, exactly. They're more likely to assume that the Emirates are inside Dubai than the other way around.
There has been a lot of right-wing leadership of late. Japan just elected a new leader who, while she plays drums in a heavy metal band, is quite conservative.
So when did you date her?
Never. She said black guys. That was 2 years ago when I tried to get her.
You tried to convince her that you were a metal musician yourself, and she was like, "No, black guys rap only."
Yeah, and she said it just like that.
I showed one of Jason's songs to a woman in the pub, and we'd just been discussing other friends that I have that she didn't know, and she was like, "Oh, why don't you bring this one the next time you come out to the pub?" And I was like, "Jason's kind of far away for that."
Why don't you bring the color?
Well, she didn't say that about me.
Bring that color fella over next time. are any of these movements a response to some of these new right-wing leaderships that we're seeing?
Because it's interesting with Italy, right, where there's like probably the biggest European movement organized around the genocide in Gaza and Palestine. But it's one where the right-wing government, at least kind of the central right-wing government and not certain figures within it, act kind of ambivalently about these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, unlike in the United States, in Europe, the right is not organizing itself in like an oppositional reaction. Like Trump being like, oh, Schumer's a Palestinian. That's like really, really bizarre in Europe, where there obviously are people who hate Palestine because they hate Arabs and they hate Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of like an oppositional reaction in this way is not quite so strong. And then I think in the other places, it's not really, there haven't been significant protest movements.
Cool.
And I think that the one thing that there was an article recently put out, a study put out by Mark Penn, the Clinton era Democratic Fred Luntz mega pollster. And he's hit hard times, but he got picked up by Israel to run this comprehensive study on attitudes towards Israel by different Western audiences, looking not just at the United States, but at the UK, Germany, and France as well. And it turns out that Israel, incredibly unpopular in Europe, unprecedentedly unpopular in the United States, but incredibly unpopular in Europe, significantly less popular than at any point in history. And that anti-Israel sentiment coexists often in the same European with a profound anti-Arab prejudice as well. So the attitude, you can very well have a European nativist, fuck the Arabs, fuck Islam, immigrants go home approach, and still not like Israel. That is a major difference between the European right and the American right. And in the European right, the organizers are actually much more pro-Israel, it's not that they're less anti-Semitic than followers. They're just as anti-Semitic, but they see the realization of their anti-Semitic agenda as flowing most probably through a partnership with Likud, Netanyahu, Ben Gvir style Israeli far right than some kind of oppositional revolutionary mobilization of their own. And the one danger, I think, is that the youth mobilization we'll see that we've seen in the third world might come back to the center of the West, but end up being pioneered or hijacked by conservative forces, right? A lot of the youth energy, especially in Europe, is on the side of the right.
Does that make these movements kind of easy pickings for right-wing capture?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I would, looking at this from the perspective of, putting on my deep state hat, which is not a fedora. It's actually a Tim Pool style beanie. If you want to destabilize a particular country, then the best way to do it is to mobilize this kind of leaderless opposition for mass destabilization. Use that to undermine the current state apparatus, the current regime in power. And meanwhile, have a much smaller and harder core of right-wing activists that can then move through and actually, while everybody else is deciding consensually on the constitution for their decentralized horizontal movement, you're already in the Ministry of National Security. You're already talking with the head of military intelligence and taking over the nodes of actual hard power that matter. And I would be very interested to see what happens with the military leadership of all of these post-revolutionary countries, right? Are they going to become custodians of the new order? Are they going to try to take it for themselves? We saw a lot of that in French West Africa, after all. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. I believe there's one other major state that have all had military coups and are aligning on post-French, post-colonial international order for that region.
All while losing to the Islamic State in Africa.
And that's the thing too, right? Like the Western forces, because of decades of the global war on terror, at this point are kind of chummy with the Islamist forces. They've been on opposite sides, but they know each other, right? They show up on each other's murder boards. They've got their contact information, right? They know each other's birthdays. So if you have change in the state power that you dislike, well, it's not that hard to, you were deconflicting with the Russians when you were bombing ISIS. When it's time to bomb the Russians, you can deconflict with ISIS.
It is interesting that ISIS are a really interesting thing because basically their appeal is we're the edgy ones. We're the ones that actually won't collaborate with the West. We will just kill people infinitely forever in a completely dedicated and murderous manner. So I do wonder.
Genocide gun go burr.
So yeah, I do believe that the Islamic State in West Africa could quite easily topple one of these states. They seem very, very delicate. And then it becomes an interesting question of what they'll do. Will they at this point go Julani and be like, oh, we're going to be friends? But in that case, what happens? Because when you aren't the edgiest Islamist, there's always an edgier Islamist. And then you just end up, it's like a particularly more violent version of the anti-corruption protest, right? Mm-hmm. Where if you stop being the edgiest Islamist, then you get an edgiest Islamic insurgency against you.
Yeah, the West had its own taste of that with the Khmer Rouge, and now it's like the Kareem Rouge. And there is that pressure on the part of all of these movements to be the most radical, to be the most hardcore, because you can be outflanked very early on for the most radical, most mobilized, most motivated activists. And then without them, your movement's not getting anywhere. You're not getting off the ground. After all, those are the guys that you need to genocide the other guys so that you can claim a monopoly of your sector of the political spectrum. But if they're working with your edgier, more, Gooner Lord, hyper online rivals, then you're hosed. That's that. Time to dust off the old CV and see if you can get a teaching job at Middlebury.
Did you guys see what happened recently with the French jihadists in Syria?
No, what happened?
At the urging of the French government, the Julani regime, as people said about Assad, went to clear this French jihadist camp. So there's this French jihadist camp of like hardline Islamists. Of course, because of that, it literally directly adjoins onto the Turkish border. Turkey, despite this, was not involved in the conflict anyway. And so with an official arrest warrant for, I think it was actually because they allegedly kidnapped a woman, which of course is like a very ridiculous thing for any Islamist in Syria to accuse another one of doing. But yeah, they launched what was officially basically a rescue mission.
Technically, that's just theft.
Yeah, to retrieve a kidnapped woman and to arrest the leader of this group. But the French jihadists didn't immediately surrender because, again, they're hardcore guys. And so they fought the Jelani forces like overnight. And in that time, it was a local group of Uzbeks. Uzbeks were like, oh, we're going to go over there and we're going to fight against the Jelani group too. So the Jelani, the government, whatever you want to call them, were like, oh, wait, don't worry about it, guys. And then they negotiated with the French jihadists. And in the conclusion, they both just left.
I love the Chechens also played this role in ISIS in the Levant. Because the tendencies, the problems, the pathologies that we've recognized on the left mobilization side, they're not missing. They're not absent from Islamist movements either. You have this appeal to some radical ideology that gets people out the door into the streets on a plane to Shanli Urfa and across the border into Syria. But once you're there, it turns out that ISIS is not a party in either sense, not a political party and not a barrel of monkeys. And you need to get shit done in this multinational, vociferous, extremist organization. The connections that groups from traditional societies, especially ones which had a history of cooperation and mobilization against security services, operational security, everything in their home country, well, those guys are so much more effective than the volunteers from, like the fat and contented regions of Europe. No offense, Stefan. But so the Uzbeks and the Chechens end up being this hardcore where if you need anything done inside the organization and you have balls of solid uranium, then you go and you talk to like Dzhokhar Islamayev or one of the toughest, most Chechen Central Asian guy you can find, and try to persuade him to help you, because if he says yes, it'll get done. You might owe more than you want, but it'll get done.
That sounds scary.
Chechens, man. Fucking Chechens.
I will tell one war story. So when we were in a safe house in Iraq, and my friend at the time, he's blonde, same as me, but he also had his beard grown out. And at one point, one of the local party guys like came over and laughed at him and was like, haha, you look like a Chechen, you should shave. And my friend was like, haha. And he was like, no, you should shave.
Like, bitch, I'm not fucking with you.
Yeah, I think being a blonde guy with a beard it depends where in Syria, but in northeast Syria, if you're a blonde guy with a beard, that is a good way to just get shot at a checkpoint.
Fuck.
Which,
Wait,
it shows the diversity
because you're blonde?
of the world.
The diversity of hate. It's good to know.
Yeah, there was I learned a sectarian joke about Iraq, that in the Battle of Najaf, there was a member of the Mahdi army that was firing at American soldiers, and a bunch of Marines identify his position. They scope him out, stalk him, chase him down. And once he sees the jig is up, he drops his weapon and he just falls to his knees and he pleads, for the love of God, for the love of Allah, in the name of Hassan and Hussein, in the name of the hidden Imam, please have mercy on me. Please have mercy on me. I have a family. I'm supporting my parents. I have children. And the American Marine, is like, who is this Hassan? Who is this Hussein? Who's this hidden Imam? And the Mahdi army guy explains, well, in my form of Islam, they're great, merciful figures. Please show the same virtues. Let me go. And the Americans decide to let him go. Later on in Ramadi, the same U.S. Marine is cornered by a group of local insurgents. And now he's outnumbered and he drops his gun and he drops to his knees and he says, please, in the name of Hussein, in the name of Hassan, in the name of the hidden Imam, please have mercy on me. And the insurgent leader looks at him and says, holy shit, you're an American and a Shiite? And then just shoots him right through the head.
Oh my God. Oof. Well,
I thought you were going to say
we can count double. You saw that, guys. I'm putting them down both columns.
I thought you were going to say like, oh no, yeah, we will show you kind of like early Islamic mercy, which means like we won't like exterminate your entire family line. We'll just kill you.
Best I can do is just killing you. Yeah.
Thank you, Kuba and Stefan, for Kuba waking up.
Can I briefly blather on about the Bangladesh quota system for the civil service? We can make it a game.
Oh, Jesus.
So first off, I mean, Kuba, if you know the answer, you're not allowed to guess. But do you two know what group received the largest affirmative action for the civil service in Bangladesh?
No idea.
It was the descendants of revolutionary freedom fighters from the Bangladesh War of Independence. So first their children, and then in 2012 they had to amend the law to grandchildren of freedom fighters because they'd ran out of children. And as of 2024, before the law was changed after the recent revolution, what percentage of civil service jobs were reserved for the descendants of revolutionaries?
I don't know.
30%.
Really?
Yes. People were very, very legitimately angry about this insane system in Bangladesh.
Is that what they want in the U.S.?
Well, DEI, right?
Yeah.
Famously,
yeah,
the greatest single beneficiaries of DEI programs are United States veterans. So this type of set-aside system, these privileges, whether it's in education or contracting or business, they're not, strictly speaking, South Asian, second world, third world thing. They exist elsewhere as well. It's just that in keeping with everything else, right, the value of those types of set-asides has been steadily depressed over time in the U.S. And now, right, Trump and Hegseth are going to have to try to figure out a new way to launder in the right kind of privilege into their system. But yeah, generally speaking, after every revolution, and this was true all the way back to France in 1789, you have the people who were genuinely essential and heroic in bringing about that political transformation. But then nobody really knows what to do with them. It's like, you kind of suck at administration, dude. You're too undisciplined for the regular military, too anarchic to be a cop. So I guess we're just going to give you a pension, because if we don't, you're going to go to your buddies, complain about how this revolution sucks, and you're going to have
But
to
surely, Cooper,
try
they'll
again.
work for ICE. That's where you've got people who are too stupid and undisciplined to become cops, right?
Damn. Have you been watching the ICE videos?
Like intermittently.
Like of these guys falling, and
Yeah,
one
yeah.
dude popped his ACL trying to chase somebody.
Yeah, just losing foot races constantly.
It's like you hear the Benny Hill music whenever I see those dudes.
I will say in Bangladesh, they didn't get rid of the one bit of what we would see as super woke DEI for their civil service, which is there's still 1% reserved for people of a third gender.
No.
Ah.
Yeah.
There you go. Keeping it real.
Yeah. The it's nice to see that you can have a trans politics without necessarily bringing in the entire apparatus, cultural structure of LGBTQ plus activism elsewhere. Right. I'm very deeply sympathetic to the goals, but there is something very Western about the whole idiom in which they're expressed.
You know that multilingual library we went to together in Gateshead, Cuba?
Yes.
Recently, I was walking past their place and they put out like an old-fashioned pride flag. You know, the one with just the rainbows on it, without all the new bullshit. And I was like, oh, nice, let's go.
I thought you meant
we got to purify the pride.
Yeah, no, when I'm like 65, that's the thing I'm whining about. I'll have like the old-fashioned pride flag out my window and it'll be like a hate symbol.
I'm so old. I thought you meant the silence equals death flag. Are you old enough to remember that one, Stefan, with the triangle on it? Or was that
the AIDS flag?
Was that an AIDS flag? That was AIDS flag, huh? The silence equals death one, Cuba?
Yeah, surely it's an AIDS flag, right?
The pink triangle became an AIDS symbol in the 80s. And I think that got superseded by all of this identitarian iconography.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I remember that one. It's funny because that means that silence is violence is actually a demotion.
True.
And on that note, this is actually kind of funny. Under Hex,
I like that one.
Application will ask you to list your gender: female, male, or alpha male.
And if you don't take alpha male, you're not getting in.
Yeah, it's like they're all alphas. What an interesting timeline. So, in the end, Cuba, do you see these things as unique, or is this kind of, as you said in your kind of opening salvo, the natural way of things?
I think that there's nothing less remarkable than having youth protest movements and youth-led political transformation in societies that have, on the one hand, a significant demographic imbalance on the side of young people, and on the other hand, a dismal track record in actually providing young people with path towards a better future. And this has happened before in the 2010s, in 98, in 89, in all across the Eastern Bloc. This is a natural part of human politics, and it has been since the very beginning. But we're going to need to think about what happens the day after these types of revolutions, these types of mass movements, because right now, one fundamental weakness of the West is that there's no productionist, no positive agenda for building a better future. Western leftism is entirely oriented towards welfarism and the alleviation of suffering. Because of that, whoever suffers most in some ways has a default claim to leadership. But with these young people, apart from the political repression or the lack of economic opportunities, these are some of the people who are suffering the least. They're young, they're healthy, unhealthy young people, those that are whose situation is absolutely dismal, don't go out in the street. And we have this problem of what do we do with young people in an age where AI is going to crater all kinds of junior work in knowledge industries. Not everybody can take a dinghy to Italy and become an Uber driver in Frankfurt or Dusseldorf. So the future belongs to whoever can come up with credible promise for the young people who are taking their political destinies into their own hands, not the people who are trying to be the most decentralized and consensual in their decision making.
Well, thank you, Koopa. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you guys for checking this out. We will be back tomorrow night at our regular time, 6 p.m. to discuss slashers. And like I said, after that, we will be watching not Koopa's cat. We'll be watching Halloween, the original John Carpenter. If you want to join us for that, become a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber. On YouTube, just click the join and you're in. Wherever you are watching or listening to this show, there's links in the description to become a patron member, patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. And we are out.